Okay, hello everyone. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Yes, good. So, I'm Kari Vierimaa. I'm from a cybersecurity company called Nixu, based in Espoo, Finland. That's where our headquarters are. We also have offices in Stockholm, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and in Romania as well. So, we are about 400, little over 400 people at the moment. First, a little bit about me. I have a little over 25 years of experience in the IT business, and now a little over 10 years specifically about identity and access management. Before that, I worked quite a long time in various different sort of Microsoft infrastructure related positions, AD architecture, design, and that kind of thing. But now I mostly focus or totally focus on identity and access management, and within that in what we call advisory assignments. So those tend to be like the first contact that we have with the customer. So it's very much about current state analysis, requirements gathering, target state design, and so on. I will go into that a little bit later. And then about our IAM unit at Nixu, we are a little over 80 experienced IAM consultants, offering consultation in all the different domains of identity and access management. So internal IAM or IGA, B2B partner identity and access management, so customer and consumer IAM, and also privileged access management, where I work as well, in addition to IAM. Internal IAM. And in all of those areas, we offer kind of like the whole spectrum of IAM services. So we're starting from advisory, which is what I do. We can go into solution design and implementation, and also offer support for those deployed solutions. So we offer continuous services as well. And we've done several dozen of this kind of IAM pre-studies or road mapping assignments, which I'm going to be talking about today, and also a similar amount of actually deployed solutions. And we have about 50 or so solutions at the moment out there in our customer environments, which we support. So our customers include big companies like Wärtsilä in Finland, Guard in Norway, and Danfoss as well. So pretty big customers that we have. So the topic of today's presentation is top findings in IAM maturity assignment. So what exactly do we mean by maturity assignment? So this is kind of like the model that we used in this kind of work, sort of time-wise going from left to right, obviously. So we start with what we call the business view, where we look at the actual business requirements for IAM. And also identifying stakeholders, identifying any kind of drivers or constraints, whether they are regulatory or compliance related in this particular phase in the beginning. Then we move on to IAM view, where we assess what does the customer have at the moment in their environment. What kind of IAM architecture is there? Are there any tools deployed? There might not be. What kind of processes do they have, and so on and so on. And then we, in a very detailed way, we evaluate their current IAM capabilities and also score their sort of target capabilities, as in what do they want from IAM in the future. Then we do readiness and risk assessment, which I will talk about later on a little bit. And this grey part on the left is really what I'm going to be focusing on here today. So what kind of findings do we get from kind of like the first three modules there? After that, typically we move on to target state design. So we do target state architecture design and road mapping. And right at the end, we can also do IAM vendor and technology evaluation. Keep that in mind when we go through the findings, that the technology evaluation is the very last thing in this sequence of phases, because that's really important. So what I've done is that I've divided these findings into 4 categories. So first of all, IT and IAM governance related findings. Then I'm going to talk about organizational readiness. Then a little bit about documentation. And then finally about tools and processes. So first of all, governance. You have to be really careful with the word governance because it's a huge word and it can pretty much mean anything. So I want to very specifically talk about IT service-related governance and of course today about IAM service-related governance. So what are the findings in that area that we typically see? Well, first of all, the kind of like overall governance for IAM is either not very mature, it's not on a very high level, or it might be completely missing. It doesn't exist at all, which means that any decision making related to IAM, as in what do you want from it, how it should be developed, is very fragmented and very siloed. It exists in various different parts of the organization. And there's really sort of poor coordination between the business areas and functions as well. Sometimes the poor coordination between business units is sort of justifiable or at least understandable because in really, really big corporations, you have multiple different business units doing totally separate things. So in organizations of tens of thousands of employees, you have business functions that do work on different business areas, so it's understandable that they don't really talk to each other. But from an IAM point of view, it's a problem because IAM should really cover all of those things. So what should you do about this then? How do you fix this? Well, it's easier said than done. It's very easy to say that, well, okay, establish a governance model, but it's a really hard thing to do. I mean, you can use some hierarchy, frameworks like, what do you do in a strategic, tactical, and operational level? Who is responsible for what? What are the roles and responsibilities, and so on? But in the end, this really has to be customized for each and every organization separately, because you may already have some kind of governance model in place, and there's no point in trying to bring a new one in specifically for IAM. So it's a much better idea to actually sort of embed IAM in any existing governance model that you already have or the customer already has. So it's a case-by-case design, really. But the much more important thing, which is a key learning here, is that governance model has to have the authority to act. It has to have the power and the mandate to do something. It doesn't help if it only exists on a very nice PowerPoint slide that these are the roles and responsibilities, and then they don't have actual power or budget, for that matter, to do anything. So that's a really key point. Very closely related to governance is a thing that we call organizational readiness. So in this kind of assignments, we have a kind of a framework, couple of dozen of factors that we evaluate and give them scores as far as how ready is the organization to actually go ahead with some kind of IAM development program or project and move on to deployment and further development and so on. And what we quite often find here is that the value of IAM is really not understood that well. IAM is owned and developed by the IT department. I mean, this is a very common finding, that it's IT that supposedly owns IAM. And anyone above that, towards the top level of management, really doesn't understand what IAM is all about and what the benefits of it are. And no one really has a complete view of it. So all of these stakeholders that should be involved, they have a different view and understanding of what IAM is and what it does. HR has its own understanding and view of it. IT obviously does their own thing. Business sees the end result because they should be able to do their job, with the right access rights and user accounts and so on. Security and risk management probably has their own view as well. You know, what should IAM be doing, what the benefits of it should be. So it's kind of like that saying when you have a big elephant in the room and everyone's blindfolded and you touch it in different places and trying to figure out what that is, and so everyone has a different view of it. So in these assignments that we do, it's incredibly important to have these joint workshops. So when we do current state analysis for example, life cycle processes, it is absolutely critical to have, for example, HR and IT representatives and hopefully security representatives in the room at the same time to discuss this. Because like I was saying, that they all have their different views of it. So we ask the questions that, okay, we ask HR that, okay, what do you do during the joiner process? And they will explain that, okay, this is how we do recruitment. This is how we do the hiring process. This is the kind of data that we add to the HR system. And then it sort of flows from there somehow, either manually or automatically, to IT, who then do their thing. But more often than not, IT is actually surprised to hear this story, because they only see their side of it. And so the IT guys are saying that, oh, we thought that you do it in such and such way, but now we hear that there's actually more to it. There's more detail, or they do it in a different way. And the same thing the other way around, that once HR has told their story, IT says that, okay, we take that data that they get from HR, we create user accounts, we apply some kind of birthright access rights, you know, give access to maybe Microsoft Cloud services, and so on and so on. So there it flows into the applications. And again, HR is surprised. They say that, you know, they didn't realize that the data they are giving to IT is actually that important. So it's really, really eye-opening for organizations to have these workshops. So that's why the recommendation here is to establish some kind of cross-communication practices, whether that's regular meetings, you know, stakeholder meetings, discussions about, well, where is your IAM service at the moment? Where do you think it should be going? Have you noticed any problems with it? So get those people talking to each other, you know, literally, get them to communicate. This can also be highly dependent on individuals, so this can be very, very personalized. So unless there's some kind of, I don't know, would you call it like an IAM champion or like an IAM owner who very actively drives this, then if that doesn't exist, this is going to be very hard to do. So if you've got one of those people, then great. If you don't, try to become that person yourself, or try to find one that you can hire, because it's really important. Next, about documentation. But at this point, you may have noticed a trend in these findings that these are totally non-technical. The only point that in this presentation that I've mentioned the tools was in the beginning with the model and the vendor selection, but technologies are not mentioned here. So all of these findings are non-technical. And they all sort of really flow from the lack of governance. So if you have a governance problem, that pretty much causes all of these related problems that I'm going to be mentioning here. So about documentation, first of all, it might not exist. So no one has it. I mean, it might be that the company is actually quite young and growing rapidly, so the IAM processes have sort of formed unofficially and no one's really kept track of them. Second, we might find that IAM is actually covered in multiple different documents owned by different stakeholders. So information security or security department in general may have guidelines and policies that have statements and items in them which are clearly IAM related, you know, about how access rights should be handled and how passwords should be handled in a secure way. but that information hasn't sort of flown down to the operational level of the IT department and the IAM service. So there might be a huge gap there that, security is doing their own thing and IT is sort of working on the operational level but is not aware of that. And HR may have IAM-related statements as well in their own documentation, certainly when it comes to processes. Next one is a pretty obvious one. It might not be up to date. I'm sure that very few of us actually likes to do documentation. It's not a particularly interesting and fun job. So when we ask our customers to give us any IAM-related documentation that they might have, when we do these pre-studies and current state analysis assignments, we might get an architecture documentation from 2019. So we might get something that's 4 years old or older. So we immediately start to think that, okay, this is probably not up to date. I mean, we're guessing that something has happened in the production to move this forward. There may be new integrations or whatever. So we're not getting the full picture from the documentation. So we need to arrange a workshop to discuss that. Okay, bring us up to date so that we know where you are. And then finally about this part, which I sort of referred to already, it might not be fully aligned with the enterprise architecture documentation. So if you have any kind of EA function, it might be that IAM is actually not that well represented there. It doesn't appear in the documentation because, again, it might just exist on the operational IT level and people just don't know or care about it. So try to create templates to make this easier. Create common management processes and clarify the responsibilities. Who owns which document, who's responsible for maintaining it. Try to be very clear about the repository, the location where this documentation exists, so that there aren't multiple versions of documentations hanging around in different places. So try to be very strict about that. Otherwise you get into versioning hell. You don't know which document is which. And then about the tools and processes. So this is the first time that I'm really going to be talking about technology a little bit. So what we quite often see is a fragmented IAM tool landscape. So young, rapidly growing organizations may not have any kind of so-called proper IAM tools in use at all, and that's perfectly okay because they're quite expensive, so it might be hard to justify. So they may have some kind of semi-automated or automated processes in place. Someone has built like a point-to-point integration. So, for example, between the HR system and AD, someone's built an integration between those two systems. But that really only gives you provisioning and nothing else. It doesn't give you any visibility to access rights or any other like the more advanced capabilities of IAM. Sometimes there's too much focus on technology. So quite often customers come to us and say that, okay, we are looking into these top 3 technologies listed by Gartner or KuppingerCole or somebody. And they really name them. They said, okay, these 3 vendors, we are really interested in this, so we want your help, our help, to deploy them. So if you remember the diagram with the phases, they've already gone to the end. They are at the final phase, and it sometimes takes quite a lot of convincing by us to say that, okay, let's take a few steps back and seriously find out, what is the problem that you're trying to solve here. Forget the technology a little while. Let's talk about what's the problem, what do you want from this, what are the capabilities, the logical capabilities of IAM, not the technology features, but the actual capabilities. So what do you want from provisioning? What do you want from access right management? What's important to you? Certification processes and so on and so on. So try try to move the technology a little bit further away and just discuss the actual requirements and capabilities first. And only after that try to create like an IAM tool roadmap. You know, what are you trying to get within the next 3 months? What are you trying to get within the next 6 months? What are the capabilities that you want to enable in your organization by implementing these tools? Or sometimes even in a small organization, you might not need to implement tools. You could actually get quite far with more formalized processes and practices and so on. Because the tools are quite expensive for a small organization. IAM projects are not cheap. And then just finally, like a summary of all of this. Like I said, most findings are non-technical. We see this all the time. So try to get the basics right first. Really look at governance. Look at the roles and responsibilities. Who owns IAM as a service? Who's driving it? Does the management understand the value and the benefit of it? Because quite often they only see IAM as a cost. So IAM is expensive, so it's hard to justify that cost. If an IT guy goes and talks to the guy or the person with the money and says, okay, I want to spend 300,000 euros this year on this IAM tool that I want to deploy, he's not going to get anywhere. You need to speak the management's language to explain, okay, these are the benefits that you're getting from IAM. So automation, cost savings through that, but even more importantly, really, in my opinion, you should talk about risk mitigation and security improvements that you are going to get from IAM, along with all of the other security components, like you've seen here at the conference. And get the stakeholders involved early, because that's how you get their commitment. That's how you get their support as well. So get HR involved right from the start. Get security involved. Get someone from the business so that they understand what they are going to be getting when IAM is deployed or developed further in your environment. And then again, forget the technology, forget features, talk about actual capabilities. So that's pretty much it. I think I'm okay with time. If you are interested in discussing this further, if you have any questions, please join us at our booth B027, which is just over there on the other side. And then there's a QR code for a blog post that we just published literally yesterday. So this QR code wasn't in yesterday's presentation, which I did, but it is in here today. So if you want to read more about our IGA road mapping services and what they offer, then please have a look. And that's really all from me. Thank you very much. I mean, if you have any questions, I'll be here for a moment, and please come over for a chat. Thank you.